CHAPTER VII of the life story of a Russian exile by Marie Sukloff, translated by Gregory Yaros. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 7 Section 1. My new life, so graciously granted to me by the Tsar, soon began. I was summoned to the office, and the governor asked me to sign a paper which stated that my death sentence had been commuted to penal servitude for life. Then he announced to me that I should be put in fetters. The solemn face with which he made this announcement appeared ridiculous to me. What meaning could fetters have to me now? The doctor, for form's sake, examined me and said that I was well fit. Nearly all the handcuffs and leg fetters there could be found in the enormous prison were brought into the office and tried on me, but all proved too large and fell off. They were made for men, and feminine wrists and ankles did not measure up to their standard. Finally, the governor found a way out of this exasperating difficulty. A blacksmith was called, my wrists and ankles were measured, and on the following morning new fetters were ready. Whether by mistake or intentionally, I don't know, but they were made so tight that on the second day my hands began to swell. This caused me excruciating pain. I tried my best to conceal this circumstance from the governor, as I was sure that the fetters had been put on me at his personal wish, and my suffering would only gladden him. On January 27th I was taken to the railroad station and put on a train for Moscow. On the road, the soldiers of the convoy — there were 4 of them — risking their own liberty, took off my handcuffs. In the same car, in a separate compartment, sat the officer in charge. He could come in any minute and see that my handcuffs were off. I asked the soldiers to put them back on me, but they would not hear of it. And only a short distance from Moscow they handcuffed me again. When I was brought into the office of the Moscow forwarding prison, Butirki, the governor, was greatly surprised to see me in fetters. He exchanged significant glances with the secretary and whispered something to him. He ordered to place me in a solitary cell. 3 days later the fetters were taken off, after 17 days of pain and humiliation. Soon after my arrival there were brought to Butirki 5 other young women revolutionists. Alexandra Izmailovitch, the daughter of a general who had not yet returned from the battlefields of Manchuria. She had attempted the life of the Minsk chief of police during the Jewish pogrom in that city. For this she was sentenced to death, which was commuted to a life term at hard labor. Note: her sister, Yekaterina, shot at Admiral Chuknin at Sevastopol after his summary execution of soldiers and sailors of the Black Sea Fleet, and slightly wounded him. She was shot without trial immediately after the attempt, in the yard of Chuknin's residence, and the admiral personally gave the command to fire. Anastasia Bitsenko, a schoolteacher, who shot General Sakharov at Saratov, one of the 5 generals personally sent by the Tsar to suppress the peasant revolt. She was sentenced to death, which was commuted to a life term at hard labor. Note: she said at her trial, "General Sakharov suppressed the peasants, and I suppressed him." End note. Lydia Yezerskaya, the wife of the mayor of the city of Mohilov, who attempted the life of the Mohilov governor Klingenberg for his active part in the Jewish pogrom in that city. She was sentenced to 13 years at hard labor. Rebecca Fielka, a dressmaker, who was arrested at Odessa in charge of a bomb factory and sentenced to 10 years at hard labor. And lastly, Marie Spiridonova, a schoolteacher, who shot Governor Luzhenovsky of Tambov when he was returning with his Cossacks from a punitive expedition to the villages. She was sentenced to death, which was commuted to a life term at hard labor. The forwarding prison was terribly congested. In cells which were built for 25 were 75 and even 100 people. Every day 200 or 300 politicals were sent away to different parts of Siberia, but as many, if not more, were daily brought to Butirki. It seemed as if all Russia were being exiled. But notwithstanding that the revolution was crushed, the prisoners so deeply believed in the speedy liberation of Russia that they went to hard labor and exile with a light heart. "You may laugh at your life sentence," comrades shouted to us through the window bars. "You will not have stayed there long when a free nation will carry you in their arms back to free Russia." In the middle of June, at night, the governor of the prison came into my cell and told me to get ready for the journey. A few minutes later I learned through the window that all the 6 of us women hard labor convicts were to be transported somewhere. About 12 o'clock we were led to the office and told that we should be sent to Akatui. There in this office I first met Marie Spiridonova. She looked so young and frail — she was only 20 — and her beautiful face was so pale that I thought she would not live long. She tried to smile to us, but her eyes remained sad. All the 6 of us were conveyed to the railroad station in a closed carriage, and put in a separate car attached to the Siberian express. Accompanied by 12 soldiers and an officer, we left Moscow for the distant prison of Akatui. II. When we were sent to Siberia, the revolutionary movement there had not yet been crushed by the government. The Krasnoyarsk Republic, which had lasted about 40 days, was still fresh in the memory of the people. The revolutionary committees in the various cities we had to pass learned in some way about our coming and organized demonstrations in our honor. A particularly striking demonstration occurred at Omsk. The Omsk workingmen knew from their railroad comrades the day and hour of our arrival there, and impatiently waited for us at the station. When this reached the ears of the local authorities, they met our train at some distance from the city, uncoupled our car, and put it on a side track, evidently hoping to take us through Omsk at night. But someone on the train divulged their trick to the people at the station. A number of workingmen seized a locomotive and started out to look for us, followed by a crowd of several thousand people on foot. Our car was sidetracked about 5 o'clock in the morning, and at noon the workingmen located us. When the officer in charge of our convoy saw the crowd approaching, he showed us a paper he received at our departure from Moscow. It instructed him to shoot us at the least attempt to escape or to be released by a mob. The soldiers were in a state of terror. They had become our friends during the long journey from Moscow, and did not feel capable of executing such an order. "We will rather die ourselves than shoot you," they said to us. The workingmen seized our car, fastened it to their locomotive, and brought us to Omsk. Thousands of people met our approach with shouts of delight. Rich women took off their jewelry and threw it in our windows. All loudly demanded our appearance on the platform. For a moment the situation was rather critical. The people were getting more and more insistent and threatened to take us out by force. In the meantime, Cossacks and soldiers were surrounding the crowd. The inevitable tragedy, with all its dreadful consequences, rose before us. We began to implore the officer to let us out on the platform for just a second, that we might induce the crowd to disperse. Fortunately, the officer, seeing that the affair was assuming a very serious aspect, permitted us to go out and address the crowd. As soon as we appeared on the platform, all became quiet. We asked the people not to attempt our release, as we did not wish to witness any bloodshed. We told them we did not believe we should stay long at hard labor, and they finally consented to let us proceed on our way. For many miles the crowd followed after our train, waving red flags and singing revolutionary songs. Peasants left their work in the field and ran to see the unusual sight. They threw flowers at us, and soon our car was covered with them. It was late in the evening when the last shouts of farewell died away in the distance. Similar demonstrations were repeated at Krasnoyarsk, Irkutsk, and other places. At last we reached Stretinsk. From there we had to proceed by etape. It took us 9 days to cover the distance of 130 miles, and in the middle of July, 1906, we reached our destination. III. The Akatui prison is located in the little village of Akatui, in the Transbaikal, near the Mongolian border. It is famous in the history of the revolutionary movement in Russia. Yet the Decembrists were confined in it. Chained to wheelbarrows, they worked in the mines, guarded by soldiers with fixed bayonets. One of them, Lunin, died there a hard labor convict, and his lonely grave is the only evidence of generations of political prisoners who were slowly tortured there to death by the Russian czars. The Polish insurgents of 1863 were sent there. The prison had been abandoned, but again rebuilt in 1889, and has since held within its dreary walls a great number of political offenders. When we were brought to Akatui, the regime there was not very strict. The wave of reaction which swept Russia soon after the October Manifesto had not yet reached this God-forsaken place, and the local administration still believed that a new political era had dawned in Russia. We were treated fairly well. We were permitted to wear our own clothing, to receive books, and enjoyed similar little privileges. When out for the daily walk, we freely conversed with other prisoners and argued about affairs in faraway Russia. But month passed after month, and news from there reached us less and less frequently, and what did reach us was far from hopeful. The country was being crushed by the triumphant reaction, and the chains of autocracy were becoming heavier and heavier. Our prison regime grew worse and worse, until, by the end of 1906, we were deprived of all the privileges and treated like ordinary hard labor convicts. Our position in this living grave was intolerable. We were young, and the fire of struggle was still burning in their breasts. We no longer hoped for the speedy liberation of Russia, and could not reconcile ourselves to a life of idleness and degradation. And we began to cast about for a way to escape. A group of comrades commenced to dig a tunnel. The digging had continued for over a month, and the outer wall had already been reached when the authorities discovered it. Within several months 5 tunnels were begun, and each time it was discovered when near completion. In the end we had to give up the thought of gaining freedom in this way. Seeing that escape in a body was impossible, the group of socialist revolutionists, headed by Grigory Gershuni, decided to find a way to escape singly. Note: one of the organizers of the Fighting League. He was accused of having planned the assassination of Minister Sipyagin, Governor Bogdanovich of Ufa, and the attempt on Governor Obolensky of Kharkov, and sentenced to death, which was commuted to penal servitude for life. He was brought to Akatui from the fortress of Schlusselburg in 1906. End note. Gershuni, as the more useful and capable member of our party, was chosen to go first. For many years it was the custom among the prisoners at Akatui to make sauerkraut for the winter. The cabbage was brought into the prison, the convicts cleaned and cut it, after which it was put in a barrel and taken to the cellar outside the prison gate. It occurred to Gershuni to escape in this barrel, and we set about executing the plan. We punched 2 little holes in the bottom and inserted long pieces of thin rubber pipe. These Gershuni was to hold in his mouth, and they were his only source of air. He sat down in the barrel, bending almost double, as it was not large enough for such a tall, stout man. On his head we laid a metallic plate to protect it from the bayonet of the sentry at the gate, who always thrust it into the barrel to ascertain that no contraband was being taken out of the prison. We stretched a cloth over him and nailed it to the walls of the barrel. On the top we threw cabbage and fastened the cover. At 11 o'clock in the morning everything was ready. The comrades, who had to cart the barrel to the cellar, announced to the head keeper that the cabbage was done, and he gave the order to open the gate. Breathless, we stood and watched how the sentry stuck his bayonet into the barrel in which our most respected and beloved comrade lay. At last it was without the gate, and the comrades, with the help of the soldiers, lowered it into the cellar. A tunnel leading into an open field had already been dug from there, and horses were waiting in the forest near by. To conceal his absence for a day or two, and thus give him an opportunity of getting away as far as possible from Akatui, we made a dummy dressed in Gershuni's clothes and put it on his cot. Its head was made of Holland cheese, specially imported from Chita, and painted by one of our comrades, an artist. When the keepers came in the evening to count the prisoners, a comrade spoke to the dummy, and they went away satisfied that Gershuni was in his place. When the keepers came into our cell and we saw their calm faces, we knew that everything was well. Our joy was indescribable. We already pictured to ourselves the triumph of the party, and warmly discussed the question where Gershuni would be by the morning count. But scarcely an hour had passed when we heard a noise in the yard. A number of keepers ran excitedly into our cell and began to look under the beds. We understood that some of the prisoners must have reported Gershuni's absence, as the authorities could not have found it out themselves before the morning count. In great trepidation we awaited Gershuni's capture. But as the days passed, our fears were set at rest. We knew that if he had not been caught on the first day of his escape, the authorities had small chances of getting him. He possessed wit and courage, and had money enough to pay his way to the nearest seaport and cross to Japan. Gershuni's escape led to still further restrictions. But as it was impossible to maintain a severe discipline in the overcrowded prison — it was built for 80, but there were 150 — the authorities transferred 50 prisoners to Gorni Zerentui, about 128 miles away. We were the only women in Akatui. We were sent here because in the whole Nerchinsk mining district there was not a decent prison for women. But in order to subject us to the full rigors of the hard labor regime, the higher administration decided to remove us from Akatui. The government again felt its power over the bleeding country, and the first on whom it avenged itself were its political captives. In February 1907, the chief of Katorga, Metus, telegraphed to the governor of the Akatui prison, Zubkovsky, that the women politicals must be immediately transferred to the Maltzev prison, about 130 miles from Akatui. Marie Spiridonova, who had not yet recovered from the effects of the tortures to which she was subjected at the time of her arrest, was not well. I, too, was sick, having contracted inflammation of the lungs. For us to undertake a midwinter journey over the frozen mountains of Akatui was to court death. The etapes which were built in the 30s of last century were in ruins, and to spend a night in them was just like sleeping in the street. We knew it all, but it was utterly useless to struggle against the decision. There, within the walls of the dreary prison, thousands of miles away from Russia, they could do with us whatever they chose. It must be noted here that had the authorities waited another month, our lives would not have been put to such a risk. In March the frosts are not so severe, and there happens even warm days. When the comrades learned the intention of the administration to transfer us immediately, their indignation knew no bounds. Even the governor and the prison doctor were unwilling to send us. Zubkovsky telegraphed to Metus that the two of us were sick, and that the doctor thought our lives would be endangered if we should have to travel by etape at this time of the year. Several days later, on February 12th, the governor ordered 4 of us, Bitzenko, Izmailovitch, Yezerskaya, and Fialka, to get ready. With a heavy heart we bade them good by. It was a sad parting, as we did not expect to see them any more. Alone in our deserted cell we lay thinking of our friends. It was late at night, but we did not sleep. Spiridonova felt very bad after the day's excitement. Soon she began to toss about and talk in a delirium, and I went over to her cot. With great difficulty I succeeded in rousing her. " Dear, dear, look at me. There is nobody here but myself." She sat up on her cot and embraced me. " Do not sleep, my dear. Do not sleep," I begged her, fearing that the terrible fit would again seize her if she should fall asleep. In a close embrace, clinging to each other, we sat in silence, seized with the consciousness of our utter loneliness and defenselessness. The prison clock struck 2. " Oh, how long it is yet till dawn," sighed Marie. Suddenly she began to listen. " Do you hear? " she asked me. " No, I don't hear anything. It is the wind roaring in the mountains." I tried to quiet her. But soon footsteps were heard outside, and our gate was opened. " Oh, they are coming! " I cried involuntarily. Chapter 8.